May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Let me just say that as a mom, this is a very distressing gospel. There's a lot going on in here that I am going to unpack so that maybe by the end of this portion of the service, you won't be running out the door. So, as we go through the difficulties of life, we realize just how important it is to be part of a family. We are born into families, but we also have families of choice. The disciples were a family of choice, and they called each other brother and sister. Congregations are families of choice. And let's be honest, families don't always make us happy all the time. Family members fail us. But where we might not find happiness constantly, we can find something deeper, something stronger, something that helps us live lives of gratitude, and that is joy. We find joy in many ways, but one way to find joy is actually in the commitments that we make. The more committed and the more we will ourselves to be committed to others, we will find joy in that relationship. So we can find joy in our commitments to our families of origin and also with our families of choice. I say all this, but the gospel gives us today, whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even life itself, cannot be my disciple. And now, if I hadn't darkened a door of a church in a very long time or ever, and this was the first time, and this is what I heard, I'd be leaving. I'd be saying, oh yeah, that's why I don't like church, right there. Right there. I have the option to preach on the epistle, which was the second reading instead, or the psalm or a hymn, but I would just have to leave you hanging with this gospel. And I believe in tackling problems head on because life is way too short to do otherwise. And that is what commitment is all about. It's about not running away when there are challenges, but facing them and tackling them head on. Because problems and challenges, they can't get solved otherwise, and they just get pushed aside. And when we push problems and challenges aside, they just fester, and they grow bigger and bigger and bigger and more unruly. So if we don't tackle the truth, we live fragmented lives. And fragmented lives, where you are living not fully in the truth, can be tragic. As we are made in the image of God, who is the creator, we are to be creative. As we are made in the image of God, who calms the chaos, who brings order to the chaos, we are to bring order to chaos. And there is no order without truth. As disciples, we are called to do difficult things we might not be immediately comfortable with, and we have to wrestle with stuff that makes us uncomfortable sometimes, and that's kind of the point of today's gospel, because Jesus says, whoever does not carry the cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. Christians are called to face and wrestle with difficult things, and we cannot run away. Literal interpretations of this passage would tell us to hate our family and our lives. And I don't think that says much about family values. This is a good example of why the Bible must always be put into context when we interpret it. I say that over and over, because I wonder how many people who say they are Christians who hate and exclude others because of what they believe the Bible tells them in black and white. I wonder how many of them read this passage and follow word for word what Jesus is saying. I don't think very many. And I actually believe that this passage is Jesus being pastoral. And I'm going to explain. We have to focus on the word hate in this gospel because that is the word that makes us stumble. Hate is a terrible sounding word. Hate in this context, though, is different. Hate in this context does not mean to hate like we think of hate. It's not about that burning passion that hits us when we truly despise someone or something. It's not that uncontrollable emotion that causes us to destroy and to seek revenge or to hurt another person in some way. Hate, in this sense, is to simply put a value of one thing over another. The word hate in this instance isn't quite accurate. The word hate in this instance is to love something less than something else. So what Jesus is saying here in simple terms is, first, out of everything that we do, we have to love God more than anything or anyone, including our family. God's value is above everyone and everything. But even with this perspective, this sits with us in a very, very uncomfortable way. So I'm going to break it down just a little bit more. To follow Jesus is to love God, to put our trust and our faith in God first. One way that Jesus describes this is also in the gospel today. He says, we can't be disciples, Jesus says, unless we give up all our possessions. Oh my gosh, can you stop giving me these things I cannot do, Jesus? If we are going to take the Bible literally, how many of us are going to do that? But we don't have to give up everything and join a monastery, but rather to give up those things that we cling to, those things that give us false comfort, those things or possessions that actually possess us and keep us from the knowledge and love of God. To be possessed is to be taken over by something. And it's like God can't get in. And it's not just things. Ideologies can possess us as well. To love God first is the key to discipleship. And to love God more than anything is the only way that we can then turn around and truly love those to whom we are tied to. Our mothers, our fathers, our brothers and sisters, our children, our husbands, our wives, our families of choice, and yes, even life itself, because loving people is very, very difficult sometimes. Even in family relationships, we fight, we quarrel, we disagree, and sometimes we need help to say, I can't reconcile this situation without God's help, so we turn to God first. And that's what this gospel is all about, loving God first, which helps us to attend more to our loved ones to an even greater degree. Because loving God first changes our hearts and minds and gives us courage and gives us more understanding and what we might call love capacity. Kind of like when you go to the Apple store and you get more RAM for your computer. We get more capacity. We get more love capacity. Our commitments become stronger and joy will be found in those commitments. So loving God more means we must first reconcile ourselves to God, reconcile our relationship with God so that our faith is strong and our trust in God is second nature, that we get to that point where we don't even think about it. We just trust. That our default is that when things go south or when we are faced with great challenges, that we don't give up on God and fall deeper into despair or anger, but that we trust that God will reveal something precious and life-affirming amidst the changes and chances of this life. When things seem impossible, be alert, because that is when we can expect the arrival of God. Let me say that again. When things seem impossible, be alert, because that is when we can expect the arrival of God. Don't we see this with the resurrection? And aren't we as Christians, as Episcopalians, a resurrection people? Let me answer that for you. Yes, we are. The prayer book tells us in our funeral rite that we are an Easter people. That means we are a resurrection people. Psalm 30 tells us, weeping may spend the night, but joy comes in the morning. And I know that it's hard to understand this, especially when we think of all the suffering around the globe and even in our own backyard. Those who suffer from depression, poverty, those who are lying in the streets in the 110-degree heat, those who feel that their lives aren't going the way they want them to go. They may not be able to find joy right now, but we can help them to see God's work in the world and be Christ's hands and feet in the world. How do we bring joy to those who mourn? But first, we've got to love God by trusting in, having confidence in, taking refuge in God. And God is all that is good, all that is creative, all that is love. And if we can only think about, if we don't want to think about God in these abstract terms, just think about God is love. Because God will show us what we need to do in love. Because God expands our hearts and our love capacity. This will break us free from our anger, our despair, our sadness. God will fill up our love capacity. It is our life's work. Like any other relationship, our relationship with God takes work, it takes trust, it takes commitment, it takes practice, and sometimes we have to love other things less in order to find the time to devote ourselves to God, to commit ourselves to the journey of discipleship so that we can love others more. So sometimes we have to give up those things just for a bit so that we can put our focus on God, and sometimes we don't want to do that. A Christian life is about the care of souls, and we can't do that fully unless we commit ourselves to God above all else, and this means sometimes we have to do things that maybe sometimes go against what has always been done before, to step back in order to see something new. God is always trying to get our attention. In Jesus' day, one of the worst things you could do was to go against your family. The people of Israel were very tribal. And for the disciples, James and John, to leave their family, you remember that story, their fishing business, and to follow Jesus was unheard of. When Jesus said, "Drop your nets and follow me and be my disciples," you just didn't do that. But they did. And that is what is so extraordinary about the beginning of discipleship with Jesus. They did. And how would the world be different today if they hadn't done that, if they never did that? So it's no wonder Jesus chose this way of speaking about discipleship, to step away from father and mother. It makes sense back then because that was where your strongest relationship was, your very identity and livelihood. So to be ostracized from family or tribe in a desert community was certain death. If you didn't have support in the desert, you would die. Tribalism back then meant security for your life. What Jesus, in a sense, has done by saying this today is to help us move away from tribalism, to go beyond our comfort zones into the new reality of God's tribe. Leave what you thought was your identity and develop a new one. Jesus doesn't care what family we are from, what family we are part of, what family we are born into, or who our families of choice are. We are all family members in God's tribe. Our energy is not to be expended on loving others less, but our focus should be on loving God more. This is the forward movement. The disciples were called, and so are we, to ask the question, what if? What if the world was different? Living in beauty, living with the faith that the dried up fig trees will one day bear fruit, that the tiniest of mustard seeds will one day become strong trees, that water can turn into wine, that despite crucifixion there's resurrection, that loving God more means tapping into an immense love that we can barely fathom. We don't even know what that kind of love is. Imagining a blessed future, a future that doesn't negate the present, but that informs what we do in the present. That is what reconciliation is. But before we can do this, we have to love God more. And this takes practice, it takes commitment every day in some way. Our faith in following Jesus is putting our trust in the God of resurrection. Doesn't mean we know how always that is in our minds, like what that means, or that we feel it. But that is who we are as Christians, and that is what it means to follow Jesus, and that is what it means to love God more, being committed to loving God more. It helps us to find the joy in what we have, and the joy in things that may challenge us, like change or adversity. Jesus suffered on a cross and died, and despite the suffering was resurrected, and this leads us to a faith that is distinct, that is hopeful, that is about love, and that is about relationship. And relationships, especially family ones, take work. They require attention. And above all, they require commitment. Today is what we affectionately call Kickoff Sunday here at St. Edmund's. And we have a taco truck and a shaved ice truck for your pleasure after the service. And in the next few weeks, we will be putting out information on how you can serve this parish in ministry. There are many ways to participate because we are a family, and families take work. We are families that strive to love God. Our new mission statement says this: we are a Christ-centered, worshiping community of care, dedicated to following the way of Jesus through deep, inquisitive learning, love of neighbor, service to others, and the fostering of community. We all have a part to play. Amen.